My friends, my church, my beloved community, good morning.
Good morning.
I am Joseph Davis. I'm a member of All Souls. I'm a little verklempt this morning. I'm getting ready to move, and it's good to be here. It's good to be here in this safe space and positive space. Whether you're here in the room, or whether you're watching us in the land of ones and zeros out there, we're glad you're here. And your presence enriches all of us and our time together. We are a Unitarian Universalist congregation, and as such, our tradition is a large tent with room for many beliefs and approaches to the questions that matter. That said, our values of inclusion, compassion, and justice are strong and indeed hold us together. We seek to build the aforementioned beloved community, making room for everyone and creating a world where everyone's needs are met. So, whoever you are and whomever you love and wherever you are on your spiritual journey, you are welcome here. And whether you come in today with laughter in your heart or tears, you are welcome here. You are invited to join us with an open mind, a loving heart, and willing hands. We welcome you today. And if you are new here this morning, I can't welcome you enough. I hope that you have visited the welcome table in the lobby where you can learn more about our congregation. Join me this morning in welcoming Alyssa Bell Jackson to our service. For those interested in learning more about All Souls and possible membership, following the service, there will be a 1-hour class, and I failed in this. I waited for this, and then it was time to come in here. Timing is everything. But there is a class, and it's a 1-hour class. It is somewhere on the premises. And it's in the library. It is in the library, and it's great, and I learned a lot. So the pathway to membership is in the library, and it will be a 1-hour class.
From every corner of the city, with every kind of hope and need in our hearts, we come together here as the wheel of the year turns. What are you seeking? Respite from the too much, too fast, from the urgent, from the scary? Comfort? Solace in the losses and disappointments, the regrets, and if-onlys? Are you seeking connections, others to be human with, to explore and discover with, to dream with, to build a better world with, to share frustration or the fleeting beauty of autumn, to share rage and sadness with, to protest with, to rejoice with? Are you seeking an inspired heart, the promise of something yet to come, of change, or of something enduring that will stand the test of time? Here may we find again the beckoning of truth, the inviting paths of virtue and strength to follow them. Here may we find the comfort that restores our hearts to cherish the vulnerable uniqueness that is in each of us. Here may we find that we are not alone in our perplexities and our hunger for a better way, but surrounded by a cloud of witness to the best that is possible in our humanity. May we rediscover the loveliness of the earth as the trees prepare to show us once again how beautiful it can be to let go. May the stories of those who came before and left to us the heritage of their memory and their work summon us to a whose lives will be shaped by all that we in our times do or leave undone. My friends, it would be a pleasure to share with you all that I think and feel as I consider the election that will soon be upon us, all that I hope for and fear for our nation. However, the rules that govern our existence as a tax-exempt institution dictate that I must not use the privilege of this pulpit for political advocacy by mentioning specific parties or candidates by name. Moreover, no one here needs me to tell you how I think you ought to vote. Though I can and will tell you that I do think you ought to vote. Nevertheless, I assure you that I shall be discussing the election this morning. Only you will have to apply the concepts I want to share with you to the candidates for yourselves. I don't think it will be difficult for you, but if you remain in doubt, ask me privately later and I will happily tell you about my own choices among the available options. For now, let us turn our reverent attention to the kindling of our symbolic chalice flame.
Here today, in this place and with these people, may we listen so that we can hear. May we hear so that we can feel. May we feel so that we can know, and may we know so that we can change ourselves and this world. May this chalice we light our way. Please stand as you are able and willing, and join me in the affirmation of our covenant, and then remain standing for our opening song. Together, church, let us affirm that goodwill is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Like flowers
human fellowship means that we are called upon to be glad with those who rejoice and to weep with those who mourn. Therefore, we set aside this time in our gathering to share with one another the joys and concerns that are presently shaping our lives. May the beauty and sweetness of these brief flowers remind us to hold one another in the bonds of sympathy, encouragement, and care. We begin with an especially joyous presentation. For the last 10 years, we have observed the custom of welcoming into our community each new child that is born into a family here. And today we have the joy of presenting a gift to Bridget Jones. We were so delighted when our beloved alto choir section leader, Shanna Jones, and her husband, Zach, told us that they were expecting a baby, and Jane Wilson helped us organize the choir to gather fabric with magical images or fairy colors. And when Bridget was born early last spring, she wasn't quite up for being the guest of honor at a quilting shower. So we had to wait until she was a little more robust in the middle of this summer to come together and assemble the blocks that the quilt is made from. And so today we have great pleasure, thanks to the help of Cynthia Butcher and Jane Wilson, who put them together into the quilt. And show everybody the back, because I think it's a really cute image on the back. Wow. There's the fairies. So Bridget, this quilt is for you in the hope that you will always remember the warmth of this community. And we also have a present for Jude, who has his own quilt, but sometimes brothers and sisters get a little forgotten when everyone's excited about the new baby. So Jude, that's for you. Thank you. And the album has the names of all those who participated in making the quilt, and the scraps of the fabric that they contributed. So that will be a reminder of all who were thinking of you and Bridget while we were expecting her. Yeah. So thank you for sharing the joy of Bridget with us.
Yes, thank you all.
I also want to share with you all the joy that much of our furniture has been moved to our new house on Lake Wildwood in Raytown, and it's just a matter of making sure it's secure for the cats before we move them over there and get moved for good. So Mark and I are excited about that. Are there other joys or concerns to be shared? I see one. And I should also remind you that if you would prefer to share something with only the congregation in this room, there will be a moment towards the end when we ask for the cameras to be turned off. So you can wait for that time if you would prefer.
I'm Mark Gibbons, and like Kendall's joy, I have a concern this morning. My concern is that 2/3 of our furniture has moved to the lake house in Raytown, and it's only a journey of 7.4 miles, but we and the cats expect to actually reside there in the next 2 weeks. I think I've been saying that since April.
Yeah.
But I think it's really happening, and it will be a big change in our life. But we hope people will come out and visit. It's not too far.
pull backwards.
Let go there, tar baby. Okay, I need two.
All right.
I have two things to celebrate. One is, I've spent, over the last several weeks, I have been refinishing my wooden deck out back. I've made repairs. I have got coatings of preservative on it. And this old body has survived the journey. The other thing is, while I was working there, the Africanized honeybees, the killer bees, moved in.
Oh, no.
So they were swarming around my two hummingbird feeders, which you've heard about before. Anyway, I got out my tried and true method of dealing with insects. And my shop vac has sucked up killer bees. And over the decades, I've gotten bees, wasps, hornets, honeybees, and now killer bees with the shop vac. Never been stung while I was sucking. So anyway, there seems to be a new crop. I've dealt with those the last couple evenings, and they seem to be having their population depleted. So 2 successes.
Thank you.
Scott England, and 2 events to share. One, a lot of people have already heard, my father died early this month. Fortunately, both my sister and I were able to be at his bedside, and last weekend we had a wonderful celebration of life for him that really celebrated the man that he was. Secondly, my Kansas City family, the Marzettes, we had a tragedy a couple of weeks ago. My youngest nephew, Joseph, 20, took his own life. So we're struggling through that. But so just keep the Marzettes in your thoughts.
Well, heavy on my heart this weekend is Western North Carolina and all of the area that was devastated by Helene hurricane. I'm from Hendersonville, and I know that area is not like Houston where it's sort of everyday event, or at least we don't get storms like that, and it's pretty devastated country now. Over 60 people have been killed. So think about Western North Carolina and from the Gulf on up, all the area that has been really hurt by this storm.
So I'm Duke.
And I'm Jack.
And a week ago on Saturday, we got married.
Good morning, my family. I'm Brian Doyle. I have a couple joys to celebrate. I had a birthday last week, and and I got to spend it with my family, and it was special. Also, choir started, but I also started a new chorus, the Heartland Men's Chorus. Come see us.
Yeah.
Our Christmas show is December 7th, 8th, and 9th. Thank you.
Yay.
this month, I was fortunate enough, along with my fellow teacher, Afra Maria, to travel all the way to LA to do an OWL training for the higher grade levels, so 7 through 9 and 10 through 12. So now I'm fully certified for kindergarten through 12th grade, and I will get to assistant/co-teach on the current OWL course that has just started up and will be going through the fall. So that's really exciting. Thanks for listening.
Good morning. I have a joy and a concern today. Yesterday, I was privileged to go back to my old high school, North Kansas City High School in Northtown. And it was a very surreal experience. I got to go because Louise, who you know, right, Jude? Yeah. She was trying out for the all-district choir. I think she wore herself out yesterday and why she's not here today. But it was very interesting seeing all these bright young people who are trying out for district choir and just walking down the hallways, and you could hear all these beautiful voices of these young, hopeful, and probably pretty scared kids. But I also got to see a wall that's installed at North Kansas City. It had a Vietnam War memorial, and on that wall, it showed all of the kids, because there are always going to be kids, who died in that war, and people I knew. And as I stood there listening to this beautiful sound, reflecting on, the senselessness of war itself, and sort of basking in the beauty. And even though my Bridget's not here today, I got to spend time with somebody else's Bridget, so thanks.
You need another one.
Margaret, do one for me.
Do one for you? Okay. Sunflowers are always good. As a lifelong Kansas. I'm Margaret Drinkwine. I'm here with two concerns. The first concern is my daughter in Greenville, South Carolina, is entering her third day without electricity. And my heart goes out to that area. Interestingly enough, my daughter, Rita, who grew up at this congregation, some of you know her, last year got a PhD in community development, and her specialization is in resiliency of communities to withstand emergencies, and she's certainly experiencing it firsthand and getting new insights. They can't leave to go to a place that has power because they don't have enough gas for their cars and they can't get gas. And the whole issue, I was listening to Asheville with its boil orders. Well, how do you boil water if you don't have power to boil it? So my heart goes out to that area. The other concern, I'll try to be brief, I got a call yesterday from a cousin about my uncle being in the hospital here with MRSA septicemia, and I went to the hospital and spent time with another cousin who is quite angry and distrustful. So I have concerns for my uncle, but I also have concerns for my ability to shepherd my cousin into righteous indignation rather than anger to become an advocate for his father's care. And this is going to be a long journey, but I think it's probably worth undertaking.
At this time, can I ask the tech deck to turn the cameras away? Jude, you going to share something? Do you want a flower?
Then I want to place this final flower in memory of Marcellus Williams, who was executed by lethal injection by the state of Missouri on September 25th, despite evidence that he may not have committed the murder of Felicia Gale in 1998. Marcellus became a religious seeker and a teacher in his adopted faith of Islam during his 25 years in prison. And I will place this final flower in recognition of all the outreachings of the Spirit that abide unspoken in our hearts, and invite you to join me in the congregational response. Words from Rabindranath Tagore, the Hindu mystic, that were quoted by Martin Sheen when the cast of The West Wing made an appearance at the White House in service of the political issues currently confronting our country. Let's speak these words together. Where the mind is without fear and the head held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom. Oh, let our country awake. And now our children have the opportunity to gather with one another in their classes, and we will have them depart with song.
Go now in peace, may love guide all your ways. Beauty be the blessing of your nights and days. Truth on your lips and kindness in your deeds. Fit to follow where the human spirit leads.
Hello, I'm Carol Coles, and I'm a member of this congregation. And one of my many joys in working with you is the Hunger Outreach Team. Today, our offering will go toward work of the Hunger Outreach Team. Let me tell you just a little bit about it. And I usually start when I talk to people by saying, so you think you know folks who are homeless? Well, some of them actually have homes. We refer to them more as houseless. Many live in their cars. Many live in tents. Some live in camps. And some really are carrying their belongings from place to place. If they're fortunate, pulling a rolly bag or pushing a grocery cart. What I know is that All Souls has done a magnificent job of coordinating food justice for folks on Tuesdays, on Thursdays, and on Saturdays. Other groups and organizations serve throughout the week, and some have permanent places. Our congregation is the locus for collecting and storing both supplies and foodstuffs so that organizations who use our kitchen and cook in our kitchen are able to provide food and sustenance and support for about 200 people on Tuesdays, 200 people on Thursdays, and 200 people on Saturdays. You do this through your offerings, through your contributions, whether you're a cook, whether you're a sandwich maker, whether you specify a donation which allows us to buy forks, spoons, plasticware, containers, baggies, the infamous quart baggies, that are needed to hold the sandwiches made from the wonderful donated bread, which is too large for sandwich bags. So these are things that I've learned from my involvement in the Hunger Outreach team. I'm going to tell you two stories that are very brief that also give you some idea of what I've learned. First, on Thursdays, sandwich makers who arrive at 5 o'clock, but really some start drifting in at 4 because we have so much fun that we like to get started early, make beautiful, as Mark Gibbons would say, nice sandwiches using 2 slices of cheese, 2 slices of meat, between that wonderful farm-to-market bread, and then a mayonnaise and a mustard, and zipped into the quart bags. Now, during that time, almost anything can be discussed, and sometimes it is. And we have developed a cadre of folks who really come for sandwich making because they want to be in the know of what's going on in Kansas City. One of our favorites is a woman who works at Oak Hall and comes right after her shift to help set up. She's a member of a local Baptist church. On Saturdays, often the Mormons come out, and they have done a wonderful job of donating some of their foodstuffs thanks to their bishop. We have a Muslim gentleman that arrives to pass out fabulous food, and then there are the Methodists. So if this jingle sounds familiar, Mormons and Methodists and Muslims, oh my, it might be the Hunger Outreach team. So another very short story is that sometimes we also are able to provide some clothing and some other supplies, as well as compassion, care, and listening. One of our members, a Tuesday night person, has a son with autism and had gone through some of his fidgets because he likes those very much. And he decided that he didn't like to fidget with these fidgets anymore, so she put them in a baggie and had them in her car. And on Tuesday night was in the midst of serving and met a mother with children looking for a place to stay that night. She was on her cell phone calling friends to see whose couch, who had an extra space for this family. And meanwhile, her son also has autism and was getting very anxious about what to do with himself. And this volunteer was able to go to her car, get her plastic bag, and hand that to this young man. So you never know when something that you have will make a difference to someone who needs you now. And with that in mind, we will be collecting an offering today, and next Sunday, we'll give you a chance to experience what we provide at one of our picnics. We'll be offering a meal, and we'll be offering a to-go bag, and you can have either for $10 or $15 for both. So we hope that you will give generously today, and we hope you'll join us next week as well. The offering will now be gratefully received. Please join me in the dedication of the offering. We dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create change toward a just and compassionate society.
Good morning. This is from How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith. Stephen Duncan, who portrays Union General Gordon Granger at annual reenactments of the announcement of the freedom for the enslaved people living in Texas on June 19, 1865 in Galveston, Texas, says, "It's an incredibly cool thing to be able to do. I mean, to stand on the steps and say, 'All slaves are free,' has got to be the most powerful 4 words in history. The first time I did it was absolutely overwhelming. We were outside and I was up on the balcony and it felt like 1,000 degrees and I said, "All slaves are free." Let me say it again, all slaves are free. And the crowd started chanting, "Freedom, freedom, freedom." Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee was there, and she was leading the chant, and I'm just overwhelmed by the power of that. Why don't more white people participate in Juneteenth celebrations? They think it's just a black thing, and my argument is it's not just a black thing. It's an American thing. This is the final bit of freedom for us all, and that is just so important. The author Clint Smith continues in many ways. The public spectacle of Juneteenth came to serve as an open rebuke to the emerging narrative of the lost cause in the late 1800s. How could anyone suggest the war was not about slavery when black people across the state and across the country were providing annual public reminders of the war's inextricable link to their emancipation? As the lost cause mythology continued into the early 20th century, Juneteenth was not only a celebration, but also a seizing of public memory. As historian Elizabeth Hayes Turner notes, memories represent power to people who are oppressed. For while they cannot control much of what occurs in their lives, they can own their own memories. The earliest iterations of Juneteenth in Texas, which began following the Civil War, ranged from ceremonial readings of the Emancipation Proclamation to black newspapers printing images of Abraham Lincoln in their pages, testaments to a man who had already begun to take on legendary and even mythical status among many in the black community. Other celebrations included church services in which preachers had the congregation give thanks for their freedom while encouraging them to be relentless in the ongoing struggle for racial equity. Often there were parades, large displays of song and celebration that shook the streets. And in the afternoons, there were massive feasts, the sort of spreads people looked forward to all year. Spare ribs, fried chicken, black-eyed peas, the smell of collard greens crawled out from between the cracked windows of homes and teased everyone passing by. Recipes for special pastries were exchanged between neighbors and transformed ovens into incubators of sugary, breaded delight. There were picnics, beauty pageants, baseball games, and an endless stream of songs that emanated throughout the streets. Unfortunately, the public celebrations became less visible. As Republicans abandoned the black community, Reconstruction was dismantled. Black American second-class citizenship was recodified through Jim Crow laws and enforced through the omnipresent threat of violence. And Juneteenth celebrations were not only unwelcome, but often dangerous. With the threat of lynching always there for black Southerners, some celebrations across the country disappeared from public view into private homes and black churches. And as decades went by and black Americans still had nothing close to full equality, to some, Juneteenth seemed more like an unfulfilled promise. In 1941, the Houston Informer, a black newspaper, wrote, "Negroes are not sure whether to be gay on Juneteenth or to observe the day with sadness. They do not know whether they are actually free here." By early 1970s, Juneteenth celebrations slowly started to reemerge as local cultural organizations throughout Texas and throughout the country began to lift up the holiday as a way to celebrate black culture and black history. In 1979, newly elected Texas state legislator Al Edwards Sr. introduced a bill which would make June 19th a state holiday. As one Juneteenth celebrant put it, "Even if the American people in the United States don't really set that day aside for us, I believe they owe it to us anyway. They ought to give the colored man a day for his freedom. It should be a red spot on the calendar and really took a side for. Al Edwards' campaign proved successful, and in 1979, Texas became the first state to create a holiday in honor of Black emancipation.
My reading is Black Joy in Pursuit of Racial Justice by Tracy Michael Lewis Gibbons. I have decided that 2020 was a great year for me. It was filled with so many tremendous professional and personal wins. Wait, scratch that. 2020 was a horrible year, actually. It was filled with tragic losses and enormous amounts of rage and grief. I have to choose one or the other, right? Surely our capacity for joy and pleasure is contingent on how much sorrow and anger is held at any given moment, right? Well, actually, no. I don't think it is. It doesn't have to be one or the other. In fact, I think it's always both and. And I've been longing to talk about all the ways in which these last couple of years have been so much of a gift for me, and yet I struggle with holding the fact that in that same space, with all the ways these last couple of years have challenged the very core of who I am as a human being and the way I navigate this world as a Black woman. And yet, in writing my book, Black Joy, Stories of Resistance, Resilience, and Restoration, I have learned that the ancestral legacy of our joy tells me I don't have to choose. My great-grandmother understood the difference between joy and happiness. The latter is a temporary state of being and may have felt the same as the former in that there was much the same adrenaline or dopamine rush. But Nanny knew how to call on the ever-present undercurrent of joy, even when happy moments were few and far between. It's why she rocked that pain out of her body in those church pews. It's why that great-great-aunt would wind that pain out of her hips, out of the at the juke joint. My ancestors knew that they didn't have to go out and find joy. They knew that joy, unlike happiness, is something that we're born with. It's our birthright. They clearly understood what Octavia Rahim writes in her book, Pause, Rest, Be. Stillness practice for courage in times of change. Joy is an act of rebellion, and so is allowing ourselves to feel our grief. They knew that joy and pain, joy and rage, joy and grief occupy. So what does it mean to give myself permission to experience joy, even when grief and rage are present? It means I feel a sort of survivor's guilt. We don't want to say in the midst of a global pandemic just how much the isolation, at least in the beginning, was good for us, because it gave us space and time to be still, because it gave some of us a chance to jump off the metaphorical treadmill of work. Taking a break from grind mode allowed us to realize that our productivity was never an indicator of our worth. So for me, it gave me time to name my pain, even when I knew the language could never do its intensity justice. We don't want to say any of this because we knew that for some people, isolation caused a spiral into depression. For many, it was the beginning of economic devastation. The pandemic also amplified health disparities and inequities in access to care. Thus, we allow our grief to take our joy hostage in a kind of solidarity, because we know how this time has been tragically hard for others. So we even unintentionally divest ourselves from joy altogether in favor of a suffering we think is our lot as a Black people. Joy is Black when it lives within the particular historical and culture experience of Black people across the African diaspora. Our joy transforms those often traumatic experiences, the result of white hegemony, into something distinctly ours. By virtue of this 400-year liberation journey we've been on, Black people have always held joy simultaneously in our bodies with rage and sorrow. And that part, and I speak personally, is not new. What does feel more recent is this notion that we shouldn't embrace the duality and actively work toward ensuring that those harder emotions do not overwhelm us to the point where there is no harmony, no healing mentally, spiritually, or somatically, as in our physical body. Righteous rage and deep grief, particularly the kind us Black folks have experienced of late, can be so all-consuming if allowed to completely split us open. And it can make it seem like joy or peace doesn't even exist. And in those instances, we can't access joy. Our grief and rage are so big, we are, in fact, in essence, disembodied. I've observed this in many social justice leaders and racial justice organizers. Those working on the front lines are often the first to fall victim to a disembodied way of moving through life and doing the work. I can always tell when an activist is wrestling with the presence of joy. Those very valid, even necessary emotions of rage and sorrow are so big in their bodies they cannot feel anything else. Joy is but a minuscule thing relegated to the past life or a kernel of memory. As a result, these activists don't rest, they don't hydrate, they don't sleep well. And so for every victory, every indictment or conviction of an abusive police officer, every policy change or increase in the voter rolls, they find themselves sicker or dealing with anxiety and other stress-related ailments. I rejoice when I hear about a movement leader taking a sabbatical or going on vacation, or when I see images of them laughing or dancing. As much as I want collective change, collective healing, whether or not the dismantling of white supremacist systems or laws ever happens, what does it look like to make room for all of our feelings instead of just the ones that feel most urgent or are easily accessed? It looks like joy, and Black joy especially takes its rightful place within our emotional canon. So part of my personal journey has been about operating from a place of empathy and grace for myself in order to expand this container, this vessel, the spirit that holds the joy of my identity, so that I can set free the joy within. Rage isn't going anywhere. Grief isn't either. What I have to do is to be self-aware enough to see when those emotions are about to harm me or turn my altruism and compassion onto myself. Some of that work is definitely somatic in nature, identifying joy in the body so that we can call it up when we need it. But some of it is just good old soul work, unlearning the generational response to pleasure that often says too much laughing or too much joy might lead to harm or violence.
These words are from the book Reverence, Renewing a Forgotten Virtue by classics professor Dr. Paul Woodruff, who writes, "Leadership and tyranny are so closely tied in our experience that we often find it hard to tell them apart. One man's leader is another man's tyrant. When we contrast leadership and tyranny, we are dealing in values. Leadership is good and tyranny is evil. Though in the tangled world of our experience, we may never find a pure example of either one. There may have been moments when even Hitler played the part of a leader, and when even the Athenian Democrat Pericles acted as a tyrant. Because good leadership is a moral ideal, no human being should expect to be a perfect leader always. Leadership would be easier to define if we could leave out such talk of moral ideals, if we could simply define it in a factual way, what some leaders do. One familiar strategy is to define leadership by the willing obedience of its followers. This is attractive, but unlikely to prove successful. The followers of a true leader are not always willing and not always obedient. There is some truth in the proposed definition, however, because tyrants have reason to be afraid of their followers, and authentic leaders do not. That is why Pericles supposes that Athens is a tyrant and no longer a leader to most of the cities and islands of maritime Greece, because Athens must use military force to maintain control, and because it is reasonable for Athenians to fear that their former subjects would destroy them if they regained their freedom. While it is true that good leaders must have good followers, yet a good follower sometimes disobeys when an order is plainly wrong. And a good leader sometimes takes her followers where they are initially unwilling to go. The need for a system of discipline is not in itself a sign of poor leadership. This is especially clear in the classroom. Teaching is a kind of leadership, and good teachers should find a way to lead unwilling students to learn. At the same time, good students must know better than to obey good teachers when they are evidently wrong. And when they do obey their teachers, they may do so for reasons that have nothing to do with leadership. Obedience and willingness do not by themselves define the classroom of a good teacher. This sort of definition is no escape from the moral perspective. Good leaders and their followers exercise certain virtues. This is what distinguishes them from tyrants and their flocks of sheep-like subjects. The moral aspects of leadership have come in for much discussion in recent years. This has been very useful, but I believe it needs to be supplemented by the study of reverence. The recent discussions of leadership have not been illuminated by knowledge of the writers who first made the distinction between leadership and tyranny, the poets of ancient Greece. The writers I have been discussing treat irreverence as the plainest clue to tyranny, and they imply that shared reverence is the mark of good leaders and their followers. Leadership, as opposed to tyranny, happens only where there is virtue, and reverence is the virtue on which leadership most depends. Public devotion to a lofty goal eclipses the leader's personal interests, if it is a goal that leaders and followers may pursue with equal fervor. Reverence gives leaders the power to treat their followers with respect, and the respect they give is returned by their followers. Tyrants who abuse their followers rapidly lose their respect. Mutual respect springs from shared reverence. The ancient Chinese would have agreed, adding that the reverence of leaders and followers is cultivated by ceremonious behavior between them. We know this, of course, in modern military organizations, which are scrupulous in ceremony between ranks, but we overlook the moral significance of ceremony. Ceremony joins leaders and followers in a common reverence and reminds them that they hold certain ideals in awe together. Leadership does not serve narrow goals any more than reverence stands in awe of small things. The best forms of leadership are devoted to the highest ideals. An object of reverence must be one to which both leaders and followers can share a certain devotion. That is why I suggest that a true object of reverence is one that all people can in principle hold in awe: truth, justice, God, as long as God is not supposed to serve special interests. This condition explains why leadership is itself a high ideal. We can speak of reverence for justice, but we cannot with straight faces speak of reverence for a particular law, such as the Gramm-Rudman Balanced Budget Bill. Reverence is the mainstay of a leader's good judgment. Leaders in real life must make decisions without knowing for certain how those decisions will turn out. If you master people by force without reverence, you will become dependent on force for your very safety. You will become isolated from the people you are trying to lead, and in this isolation, you will make mistakes. From the other side of command, people will see you as more of a tyrant than a leader, and perhaps even as an enemy. At the same time, it is no good trying to be reverent on your own when everyone around you has discarded virtue. And the same goes for leadership. It's no good trying to be a leader among people who recognize nothing but brute force. Civil war and natural disaster can reduce people to that level. So can tyrannical power. Persuasion appears to be an alternative to the use of brute force, but persuasion can also be seen as a kind of brute force through the use of words. And the ancient Greeks were well aware of the tyrannical uses to which rhetoric can be put. That is why those who profess to admire Pericles, who was well known for his ability to persuade the Athenians, attribute the man's success more to force of character than to force of words. 20th century history shows how rhetoric supported tyrannies such as those of Stalin and Hitler, so persuasion is a neutral tool. Tyrants and leaders both use it. Nonviolence looks like an alternative to tyranny because violent force or its threat is used by tyrants everywhere. Perfect leadership, which could only occur in a perfectly virtuous society, could no doubt maintain itself without force or violence. In certain circumstances, nonviolent leadership has been effective, mainly as a moral beacon. But behind most authority in the real world are discipline and the threat of force. Force, like rhetoric, is a neutral tool, but tyrants and leaders use their tools differently. Leaders do not simply overpower their followers with the force of words or the threat of discipline. There's something that regulates a leader's use of power, and there's something else that gives a sinister cast to anything a tyrant does with his powers and makes brute force out of force. We will not understand what that is merely by examining notions such as force and rhetoric. The crucial difference must be moral or ethical. Justice was the key, according to Plato, to the puzzle of sorting out leaders from tyrants, but he cannot be right. Justice never moves people to refrain from doing whatever they have the power and the inclination to do. The Athenians understood that justice has very little motivational power. It is a fairly dry virtue, guided more by judicious thought than trained feeling. Virtues such as sympathy, reverence, and courage, by contrast, are capacities for emotions, and where they are actively present, they move people to act or refrain from action. So the weak cannot rely upon justice to restrain their powerful overlords, because justice, unlike reverence, is not a motivational restraint. Nor can the powerful rely on justice to secure the obedience of their subjects. Having good arguments for the justice of your cause makes no difference. The tyrannized will plot rebellion and revenge against their overlords. Justice does nothing to turn the winner of a contest into a leader or the loser into a willing follower. The trouble with justice is that it allows there to be winners and losers in the first place, and such an outcome is hard for leadership to overcome. Reverence, not justice, is the virtue that separates leaders from tyrants. When leaders are reverent along with their followers, and their common reverence unites them in feelings that overcome personal interests, feelings such as mutual respect, these feelings take the sting from the tools of leadership, from persuasion, from threats of punishment, from manipulation by means of rewards. This is because there are no winners and losers where there is reverence. Success and failure are dwarfed by the magnitude of whatever it is that they hold in awe together. The poet Wordsworth recognizes this in his tale of boyhood races over water in England's magnificent Lake District. He says, "In such a race so ended, disappointment could be none, uneasiness or pain or jealousy. We rested in the shade, all pleased alike, conquered or conqueror. Thus our selfishness was mellowed down, and thus the pride of strength and the vain glory of superior skill were interfused with objects which subdued and tempered them, and gradually produced a quiet independence of the heart." You know, the trouble with democracy is mobs. A mob is like an organism. It has energy, impulse, and emotional intensity, but very little in the way of identity or self-reflection or capacity for reason. It has no capacity to question its own principles, and it reacts without hesitation to the tides of anxiety and popular stress. In her book on the history of 16th and 17th century persecutions of alleged witches in Scotland, Stones and Ashes, author Alison Shaw observes that witch hunts and burnings took place with relative popular support at a time of great cultural, political, and economic turmoil, when many people felt that they were losing control of the proper order of things and were surrounded by intense, intangible dangers. I have a suspicion that Professor of Classics Paul Woodruff would claim that mobs are dangerous because they lack reverence or offer any shared set of values that could challenge their impulsive fear or anger. I would claim that anyway. This is what Robert Frost is talking about when he advises us, when at times the mob is swayed to carry praise or blame too far, we may choose something like a star to stay our minds on and be stayed. This is good poetic and spiritual advice, I think, and yet there are times in the course of human events when the old orders of injustice and oppression need to be recognized as unsustainable and dismantled by popular demand, if not by leadership from those who benefit from the power structures of the status quo. Such a demand will always be perceived as irrational mob violence and resisted by the forces of what Woodruff would call tyranny, those who retain power and privilege by violence rather than through loyalty to the persuasive ideals of authentic leadership. I would certainly like to think of myself as a participant in resistance against the forces of tyranny striving to maintain arbitrary power and privilege, though I am aware enough to realize that I benefit from considerable privilege in the status quo of 21st century American culture, and may not always be alert to my ingrained bias toward maintaining that system. Yet there are moments when my consciousness awakens to the possibilities of something different from life in the power structure that I have always known, and I am uplifted by the sensation of being part of some transformative power larger than my own benefit. It is not an unfamiliar feeling. I know that I have experienced it any number of times, and I have come to call it reverence, an awe for justice, and a yearning for beloved community. I know that I am not alone in this feeling. It is one of the reasons I come to church, to me, in the midst of people like you, dearly beloved, who I believe will share it with me. A shared reverence for something larger than the self is part of how Woodruff proposes to differentiate between the tyrant and the authentic leader, between a crowd of voters at the polls and a dangerous mob, between a criminal gang and a legitimate army. He may be right. It's an interesting thought. I am also interested in what Tracy Lewis Gibbons called the somatic, as in our physical bodies. Several of the Black writers we have heard from this morning have shared with Lewis Gibbons observations about how generations of Black resistance against colonial racism in the US and elsewhere have maintained their sanity and their political power by keeping room in their bodies and their spirits for both the experience of grief and rage provoked by their subjugation to injustice and the experience of joy that arose in response to shared hopes and ideals and small victories for dignity and community, even when these were by no means final or even permanent. One feature that I remember from my early reading was when I was first learning about the evolution of Juneteenth as a holiday in the community of formerly enslaved people and their descendants, was that it quickly became a dress-up occasion. And this made sense because privileged women who used enslaved women as domestic and personal servants sometimes rewarded them by giving them cast-off clothing as fabric to remake into garments for themselves. However, enslaved women were not allowed to appear in the type of dresses worn by their mistresses, and even after emancipation, supposedly free blacks could be punished for allegedly aping white folks by dressing too fine. Thus, the celebration of freedom became a day on which to display one's finest, most fashionable clothes as an affirmation of the right to own and appear in whatever one wished. It was both a way to honor the occasion and to demonstrate its meanings without saying a word. It was also a manifestation of joy. Joy among the oppressed is always at least slightly subversive, for it carries the message that tyrants do not control everything, and their subjects still have access to their feelings and to the sources and the expressions of joy. The writer Barbara Ehrenreich has documented the history of collective joy in her book, Dancing in the Streets. She argues that collective and ecstatic dancing is a nearly universal biotechnology for binding groups together. Physical movement, a powerful escalation of typical protest chanting, not only releases emotion, it also creates bonding, trust, and equality, dissolving hierarchy and increasing a sense of community. In his book, The Righteous Mind, social psychologist Jonathan Haidt describes the innate craving that people have to belong to a greater whole, to transcend self-interest and lose themselves temporarily and ecstatically in something larger than ourselves. Haidt calls the ability to do this the hive switch, which makes groups more cohesive and more successful in relation to others. What's more, it's actually essential to our survival. Our species, Homo sapiens, has outlived all other hominid species because of our ability to coordinate with others in groups. Historically, groups who could hold themselves together through dance and other methods would have enjoyed an advantage over more weakly bonded groups. This hive ability makes groups more cohesive and more successful in relation to others. The switch can be activated at football matches and at raves through the use of hallucinogens like LSD and even in choral singing or military drills. It has its roots in biology, since all of these activities release the hug hormone, oxytocin, which promotes social bonding. On an undeniably physical level, collective dancing has the power to generate a deep sense of elation. But at what point does collective joy become subversive? Columnist Janie Starling, in a post on the blog Open Democracy, responds, within the context of capitalism, collective joy through dancing and other forms of expression is already subversive. Back in 1905, the German sociologist Max Weber warned of an unprecedented inner loneliness of the single individual that accompanied the spirit of modern capitalism. In a capitalist society founded on competition, privatization, and small family units, collective joy, as opposed to individual happiness, signals both personal resilience and political rebellion. The very act of rejoicing in a shared connection is a triumph in a society that seeks to divide us. The subversive power of collective joy is maximized when it occurs in public, politicized spaces as an affirmation of collective identity. Joy can score cultural and political goals in the name of liberation because it simultaneously serves an individual and a broader political purpose. Many group activities are carried out in the pursuit of hedonist escapism or in order to forget ourselves. However, when collective joy erupts in pursuit of defiantly reinforcing your very existence, especially in the face of those who seek to erase you, it has the power to subvert authority and to release suppressed rage while connecting us to each other and reinforcing a sense of group safety. In this context, it is worth remembering that the public, politicized celebration of Juneteenth originates in Texas, a place where many enslaved people were brought or sent by their owners in response to events during the Civil War, including the Emancipation Proclamation, in the hopes that decisions made by the federal government in Washington would have little effect there, or that enslaved people would not learn about them or would not be able to put them into practice. This hope was to some extent realized with the abolition of slavery after the end of the war, for even following General Granger's public announcement, it would be months before the word of their freedom spread to black people held in bondage on more geographically distant and isolated plantations. And many of the enslavers in these areas attempted violently to prevent their former servants from departing or otherwise exercising their liberty. The joyful news of freedom come was best reiterated by those whose identity the powers had indeed attempted to erase, in public, in the safety of a group, where the collective joy was more than just personal relief, but also a reconnection with the community that had not yet entirely succeeded in fully claiming its liberation, and a rededication to that ultimate goal on behalf of the shared ideal of equality and for the sake of generations remembered and generations yet to come. As I said a few moments ago, no one here needs me to tell you how to vote. What I do want to ask of you is that you come to this consequential responsibility with Professor Paul Woodruff's concept of reverence in mind. The reverent consciousness, he says, is one that understands the importance of ceremony. We, who share a devotion to the ideal of democracy, which was originally borrowed from the concept of our congregations as communities founded upon covenant, will hold to the ceremonies of democracy because they transcend our private interests, not because we expect to prevail always as winners, but because this is how the guardians of the ideals of freedom behave. Many Christian hymns originated as expressions of sentiments or theological viewpoints that were once considered subversive. These could be sung in solidarity by people who agreed, even when they could not be discussed without dangerous controversy. The Victorian poet Henry Van Dyke wrote the words "For joyful, joyful, we adore thee" to Beethoven's Ode to Joy melody in an era when much of Christian worship tended to focus on God's power and judgment of human sinfulness. Having been accused of expressing heretical Universalist ideas in this hymn, Van Dyke wrote in reflection on the text that he was inspired by the beauty of the Berkshire Mountains surrounding Williams College when he stayed there as a guest, and said further, "These verses are simple expressions of common Christian feelings and desires in the present time. Hymns of today that may be sung together by people who know the thought of the age and are not afraid that any truth of science will destroy religion or any revolution on earth overthrow the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, this hymn is a hymn of trust and joy and hope." He did not say that he intended or recognized any possibly subversive quality of the joy he expressed, but I tend to believe that he must have been aware of it. Our closing hymn is another example of subversive hymnody. The words to "How Can I Keep From Singing" are often attributed to a traditional Quaker hymn, even though worship in the early community of Friends did not traditionally include singing. "My Life Flows On" was attributed to an author named only as Pauline T. in 1868 when it was first published as an American folk song with music by Reverend Robert Lowry. The words appear to pay tribute to Protestants, including our own ancestors, the Anabaptists, who were persecuted by religious and state authorities when they first arose as part of the Radical Reformation in the late 16th century. They demanded reform not only within the church, but of corrupt practices and governmental powers, which tagged them as politically as well as theologically subversive. The song honors those who suffer for their beliefs and expresses the conviction that their fidelity is remembered by and inspires the communities that share their ideals, who must and will sing their beliefs together and experience a defiant, sustaining joy in doing so. Many modern Quaker communities have adopted the hymn as their own, embracing its original misattribution. I invite you to sing it with me now.
My life goes on in endless song, above earth's lamentation.
brought the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fires of commitment. These we send beyond the four walls of this place to change the world and carry within our hearts and minds until we are together again. Emma Goldman was a political activist and writer during the beginning of the 20th century, known for her free-thinking and rebellious and anarchist and communist beliefs. Once she encountered a young boy who referred to her dancing as unbefitting and dishonorable for someone promoting the serious anarchist cause. Goldman replied, "I did not believe that a cause which stood for a beautiful ideal, for release and freedom from convention and prejudice, should demand the denial of life and joy." She went on to say, "If it means I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution." May we carry that message in our hearts into lives of subversive joy.